There was a certain point where, my faith became mine. I made the decision to be confirmed and to be Catholic. I became really involved in my youth group. I wanted to be surrounded by other young people who cared about their faith as much as I did.
Meli Barber grew up in the Catholic Church, a cradle Catholic, she calls herself. It defined not only what she believed, but who she was, and what she wanted to do with her life.
I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in parish ministry.
Until one day, that calling, that dream, was taken away.
And I was very nearly fired and forced out of the program.
She devoted her life to her faith, but that faith was now rejecting her. Not because of a lack of devotion or belief or qualification, but because of who she was, a queer Catholic.
I don't know how to explain what it felt like to be told that all of these people were talking about me and who I am, that I might not be able to continue working a job that I loved because of that.
This isn't an isolated story. It's one of many in the Catholic Church and throughout many religious traditions. Christianity and Judaism have had long-standing theological concerns with LGBTQ issues. And in the U.S. especially, it's one reason why some people are leaving them. But from the Vatican to certain Jewish denominations, there are major movements afoot to be more open, tolerant, and accepting.
Pride Shabbat, where the Friday night of Pride weekend, we would have people from the queer community, from the straight community just come in to just celebrate Pride.
On today's episode, the first of a two-part series on gender and sexuality, we'll speak to Rabbi Shira Stutman and Father James Martin about their efforts to make their respective faiths more welcoming.
I like to invite people to look at the real-life experiences of LGBTQ people, taking it out of the realm of theological arguments and disputations.
And learn some of the science behind how our emotions play into efforts by many faiths to promote a more traditional view of gender roles. We'll also hear more from Meli Barber, the president of Dignity USA, an organization for queer Catholics, about how things are slowly changing.
So I do feel like the world is changing, and as people change, the church is going to have to change too, right? Because again, the church is the people.
I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works. When it comes to the Catholic Church, there's no one working harder to welcome the LGBTQ community than Father James Martin. It's something he's passionate about, and something he often takes flack for from conservative Catholics. But he didn't set out to make this his ministry. A tragic event set him on this path.
My son was in there with his boyfriend and two
this
other
mass shooting in Orlando, Florida, a massacre in a gay nightclub.
I don't know if he was left in the club, if he got shot.
The Pulse nightclub massacre in 2016 really galvanized me.
Today, as Americans, we grieve the brutal murder, a horrific massacre of dozens of innocent people.
I had written about LGBTQ people before in America, but it wasn't until then when 49 people were killed at that nightclub in Orlando. And I saw what I considered to be a really sort of paltry response from the bishops, most of whom ignored it.
The nightclub shooting brought Catholicism's long-standing rejection of the queer community into sharp focus. But for a faith that believes in welcoming strangers, people who aren't like them, this seemed to Father Martin like a pretty big contradiction. And unlike many human shortcomings, not one the Church worked hard to overcome.
The ones who didn't, only a few even used the word gay or LGBT. And I just thought, boy, even in death, these people are invisible to the Church. Like, what do they have to do to get some sort of sympathy? And so I did a Facebook video, which turned into a talk, which turned into a book, which turned into this ministry. There's always been a tendency among human beings to exclude the one who is different, the one who is seen as other. For many straight people, historically, they are just other. They're different. They're strange. They are foreign. So I think it's a kind of human trait, unfortunately, a kind of social trait. And then on top of those kind of human reasons, there are people who are focused on texts in Leviticus and in St. Paul, which certainly condemn homosexual activity, but also, I always point out to people, they condemn a lot of other things.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I wanted to bring up. I mean, in Leviticus, and I know there's arguments about the translations, but it says, you shall not lie with a man as with a woman, and that it's an abomination. St. Paul argues that men who have sex with men will not go to heaven. But there's a whole other list of things. People who drink too much, people who fornicate. Leviticus is full of lots of rules that most Christians, I don't think, are aware of. And St. Paul says the same thing about people who may have sex outside of marriage or drink too much. You could argue theologically, if you want to take a strict rule, that all of these are sins. But I'm wondering, why does this one get signaled out so much? I mean, people aren't, saying, oh my God, if you had sex outside of marriage, don't come to church. We're going to have you wear a scarlet letter.
No, it's pretty easy. It's because of homophobia. In Leviticus, as you say, we're supposed to stone women who are caught in adultery. We're supposed to stone people who take the name of the Lord in vain. So if I said, OMG, and said it out loud, you're supposed to kill me. And I often ask people, do you think that makes sense? Well, no, of course not. Well, why not? It's in Leviticus. We don't stone women who commit adultery. We don't stone people who take the name of the Lord in vain for good reason. Oh, well, we think about that differently now. Well, why don't we think about homosexuality differently? Oh, well, that's different. And that's different because, for the most part, people take the name of the Lord in vain themselves, right? Whereas homosexuals can be other, can be different, can be excluded.
I agree with Father Martin that it's easier to discriminate against people we see as different from ourselves. But still, why is the sin of homosexuality, and I'm using air quotes around the word sin, the one that gets many people so riled up? It's here that I think science can add a little insight, especially around the term abomination. You see, when it comes to judging morality, our emotions play a big role, and perhaps none more so than the emotion of disgust. While we can say we're disgusted by spoiled food or bad odors, we also use that term for morally objectionable things. You can be disgusted by people's dishonesty, hypocrisy, or sexual choices. So when sacred texts say that homosexuality is an abomination, it kind of captures our brain's attention. Even the word itself can make us feel a little queasy. But that still doesn't answer the question of why it amps up bias against the queer community more so than, say, straight people who are having sex outside of marriage. To find the answer, we have to look at how prejudice works. In our minds, the category of others, of them, of people not like us, always holds potential threat. But how we're feeling at the time we encounter or think about those people can really push us toward discrimination or even hate. Let me give you an example of what I mean. A while back, my colleague Nilanjana Dasgupta and I decided to look at how people's feelings affect prejudice. But there's a challenge here. You can't really ask people if they're prejudiced. Few would admit it. Others who hold mild biases often don't even realize it. While they won't actively condemn a given group, they might be fine with sitting by while others do, which in itself is a tacit endorsement. To get around this issue, we decided to measure people's implicit bias toward gays and lesbians. Or, put another way, we decided to measure their mind's automatic evaluations toward these groups. You see, every time you focus your attention on something in the world, your brain makes an automatic judgment about it. Is this person or object something I like, or something I don't? And depending on the situation, those judgments can impact how you behave. Put simply, the more your brain sees something as bad deep down, the more you're likely to avoid it, condemn it, or otherwise see it as a threat. For our experiment, we brought regular old college students, a group not known for conservative moral views, into our lab to measure their implicit bias against gays and lesbians. The way we do this is a little complex, but it basically boils down to having people make rapid decisions about images of straight versus gay couples, as well as words we all see as positive or negative. There's a link to the research paper in our show notes if you want to know all the details. As we expected, the majority of students showed a small bias against gays and lesbians, even though many didn't consciously recognize it. This type of implicit bias has been found repeatedly in the general population by many labs in the past, though I'm happy to say it's been declining with time. But here's the catch. In another experiment, we asked people to think about a substance they found disgusting right before we measured their implicit bias. What happened? The prejudice they felt toward gays and lesbians increased by 40%. Think about that. 40%. From very small to pretty sizable. It's almost like creating a new prejudice out of nowhere. Now, it's important to note that disgust didn't do this for all groups toward which people held implicit biases. Just ones, like the case here, that they felt different from and that are associated with an action they felt was unnatural or immoral. So when people read or hear over and over again that homosexuality and adultery are abominations, the term ends up only sticking to the first category, the one that's other, the one that is supposedly impure, not just lustful. But these findings also suggest something more problematic. Anti-gay messaging that uses words like unnatural or perverted, words whose very utterance stokes feelings of disgust, is a strategy that can be weaponized. It can be used to change people's moral views, even without their awareness. It can help push people who might have otherwise held only small reservations about welcoming queer parishioners, reservations that could have been overcome, to feel justified in excluding them from fully being a part of their congregation. And that separation is now cutting both ways.
I think the difference between, say, when I entered the Jesuits 35 years ago and now is 35 years ago, the question for a lot of LGBTQ Catholics was, how do I find my place and stay in the church? Now, it's very much, I don't need it. I'm not going to be treated like this, and I'm not going to stand for it. If I'm straight and they treat my LGBTQ friends like this, I'm not going to stand for it. And not in a petulant way, but just in a way that, they feel sort of fed up and they feel unwelcome in their own church. And when they sit there every week and hear these things and hear these pulpit announcements and read these parish bulletins that are just targeting them, they just say, who needs it?
But there are many people who can't just walk away from a faith that has defined, grounded, and guided them for their entire lives. It can be a profound loss, one made all the more traumatizing by being rejected from people that you thought of as a kind of family. This was the case for Meli Barber, who we heard from at the top of the episode. Here is her story.
I was a cradle Catholic, though I was born and raised Catholic my whole life. My faith was always really important to me as a kid growing up. We went to church every Sunday, so I can remember my black patent leather shoes and, my socks with little ruffles on them. There was a certain point where my faith became mine. I made the decision to be confirmed and to be Catholic. I became really involved in my youth group. I wanted to be surrounded by other young people who cared about their faith as much as I did. I didn't know anyone who was openly gay until I went to college. Now I know that there are other people I went to high school with who are also queer, but we certainly didn't talk about it. And looking back on it, it is so clear to me, what a queer kid I was. I read through my journals. It's oh, yes, I definitely had a crush on that girl in the 7th grade. That's what was happening. That's what I didn't understand. But I didn't even have a language or a vocabulary for it. There was just a lot of silence in my community around being gay. So I was 21 when I first came out. There was a lot of support from the student body. So it just felt, in some ways, it felt easy. At first, at least, it felt easy. I was really involved in campus ministry when I was in college. I loved it. Not only attending programs, but I became really involved as a retreat leader and working in campus ministry programs as well. When I was finishing up at Notre Dame, I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in parish ministry.
Even though Meli had come out to her Catholic college community, she knew not everyone would be so tolerant. So while she pursued her master's in theology and interned at a local parish, she kept her sexuality quiet and stopped dating altogether.
I felt like if I was going to be in a position of teaching the faith and in a leadership role in the church, I needed to be following what the church said, even if I didn't agree with it.
Until one day, a woman Meli had been living and training with outed her.
One of the women that I was living with became, and I quote, concerned for my chastity, and I was very nearly fired and forced out of the program. I don't know how to explain what it felt like to be told that I might not be able to continue working a job that I loved because of who I am. That remains the most traumatic experience of my adult life. It was really Carly, the whirlwind of Carly that blew into my life that really changed everything. I really had not dated since I was in college. At that point, I was 27, and Carly came to dinner an hour late with a cheesecake, and we started talking, and somehow she left with my phone number. We went on our first date a couple weeks later. I guess it was over 2 years that we concealed our relationship. I regularly attended the church where I had worked. I had been volunteering as a teacher in the religious education program. Unfortunately, someone complained about Carly and I attending church together. Perhaps we sat too close together, or perhaps I put my arm around her. And after the complaint, the priest met with me and asked me to step down as a volunteer.
Once again, Meli had been found out by the church and told to leave. But Meli's faith was too important to her to just walk away. And that's when she found Dignity USA, the world's largest and oldest gay Catholic advocacy network. It started in 1969, just a few months before the historic Stonewall Uprising, a protest considered a watershed moment for the gay rights movement. Dignity was a quieter kind of catalyst. Its goal was to bring dignity into the spiritual and social lives of the LGBTQIA community through monthly mass, worship, and potlucks. It is now expanded to 30 chapters across the country. And while these chapters are not officially recognized by the Catholic Church, Dignity still offers essential education, support, and advocacy.
We were the first organization to talk about our wholeness and our holiness as LGBTQI people. We were the first to explicitly say that the way that we love is holy. So we have always been on the forefront of advocating for the inclusion of LGBTQI people.
It was a place for Meli and other queer Catholics to find community, solace, and acceptance within their faith, not at the expense of it. For Meli, it's been life-changing.
Dignity was a real lifesaver for me at that time. It's hard to describe, but just the experience of knowing that it was okay to be fully me allowed me to relax in a way that I couldn't do at any other moment of my life. I needed to be in a space where even if I didn't talk to people, I knew that they were accepting of who I was. I needed that hour where I didn't have to think at all about hiding who I was.
Now, 13 years after attending her first Dignity Mass, Meli is the president of Dignity USA. It's an entirely volunteer position alongside her full-time job as a social worker. And while she still can't be involved in parish ministry in the Catholic Church, her position at Dignity offers something close, something she never thought she'd be able to do again.
I really did feel called to ministry. I still feel called to ministry. The one thing I say all the time as president of Dignity is that Dignity returned me to myself, because it gave me an opportunity to be a minister again in a way that I haven't been able to do for a number of years.
Catholicism is but one story in the Christian tradition. Over the past few decades, different denominations have taken different paths. Some, like the Episcopal Church, have become much more open to the queer community. Others, like many fundamentalist groups, have hardened their views even more. But Christianity isn't the only major religion to confront LGBTQ issues. Judaism has been doing so too. Rabbi Shira Stutman was the senior rabbi at Washington, D.C.'s Sixth and I Synagogue, and she currently co-hosts PRX Chutzpah podcast. She's known for her strong advocacy of LGBTQ rights in Judaism. She's also part of a smaller Jewish movement.
Reconstructionism takes Jewish law and observance very seriously, but at the same time has a tremendous amount of flexibility for understanding how contemporary learning can impact some of the traditions we've had for thousands of years.
And one of those traditions is marriage, or in this case, gay marriage.
For a few thousand years in the Jewish tradition, that was something that was not kosher. It was not something that was even in the rabbinic imagination. And then at a certain point in the 20th century, thank God, we began to realize through research in science and sociology and just sort of understanding human nature a little bit differently that queer marriage is just as sacred and loving as straight marriage. And so therefore, the recon movement was like, this idea of having a ban on this type of marriage makes no sense. And they just let it go. And so that process was much quicker because we were able to sort of take our secular knowledge and combine it with our Jewish knowledge rather than having to go through a year-long process of searching through Jewish texts to prove that queer marriage was kosher.
The Reconstructionist rabbis were willing to reinterpret the Torah within an updated context, one that recognizes changing historical norms.
In Judaism, for many thousands of years, marriage was understood as a man, to a certain extent, acquiring a woman in a way that it doesn't look very different from the way they would acquire a piece of cattle. That was just the definition of the word marriage, was a man acquiring a woman and bringing her into his home. And so the idea of it being two men or two women or two non-binary people was just not definitionally part of the equation. So that's like part one.
Part two is more complicated.
The question about the Jewish approach to homosexuality, as it were, is a more complicated one, if only because we actually don't really know where the origin of this homophobia comes from. When I was growing up, it was often blamed on the ancient Near Eastern pagan traditions who had a problem basically with anal sex between two males. But we Jews often love to blame the ancient Near East, as opposed to sort of our own inherent homophobia. Of course, there is that line in the book of Leviticus, right, that is translated as a man shall not lie with a man the way he lies with a woman. It is abomination.
There's that line again.
But the problem with that line is that that translation that I just gave you is very far afield from the actual Hebrew. And when you look at the actual Hebrew before the translation, it's very clear that there is something that is not kosher that is going on, but the idea of it being an abomination or abnormal is totally lost from the equation, is not a part of the equation at all. And so, yes, does the Torah and the ancient rabbis, do they have a problem? Again, mostly with anal sex between two men. If I'm going to be very explicit here, yes, 100%, it was not okay. The reason for it comes from the society around us and also a little bit from the deep rabbinic love for sperm. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say this except the most explicit way.
It shall not be spilled, yes.
Right. It was like liquid gold. And so the rabbis were always very concerned about the spilling of sperm in any place where it wouldn't lead to procreation.
So what happens when rules seem to be in contradiction? One of the things they say the Torah emphasizes is that it is not good to be alone. That is, people should find love and joy and togetherness and celebrate that. How do you make sense of that if you're someone who happens to be attracted to members of the same sex or other genders that don't fit the traditional categories?
The conflict that you're articulating is the deepest and, one might argue, most critical part of the Jewish endeavor, the Jewish project, as it were. In Judaism, we do believe that it is possible, if deeply frustrating, to hold two truths at the same time, right? You can hold this truth that it is not good for the person to be alone and humans need dignity, and that is all part of our tradition. But on the other hand, we do have these laws that constrain how we are in community and how we are with others. And I will say that the idea of a relationship being based entirely on love and connection between two people, as we both know, is a sort of modern phenomenon, right? For like most of Jewish history, marriage was about the two people. And in Judaism, it is always about love, but it was also about the community. And so the idea of two people being connected on every level, like interpersonally, sexually, that's just a newer idea. And so one of the things that contemporary rabbis have to do, as we understand this idea, is figure out how it fits into traditional Judaism and how traditional Judaism fits into it.
One example of this is reinterpreting the role that procreation plays within marriage.
The commandment of what we say, pru or avu, be fruitful and multiply, that is the first commandment given by God in the Torah, in all of Judaism. And so being fruitful and multiplying is of critical importance to Judaism, so much so that the rabbis spill so much ink about, like, how many kids does it take to fulfill the mitzvah? What genders do they have to be? And so on and so forth. And, there are some really problematic passages about what happens if, and this is scare quotes, what I'm about to say, if your wife is infertile.
That's what I was going to ask you, because we certainly allow people who are infertile to marry.
We do.
Now.
But there are, right, but there are Jewish texts that say, and we don't follow them in any Jewish community that I have ever heard of, but there are texts that say if after 10 years there's no child, you should get divorced, right? And so there is this sort of emphasis on being fruitful and multiplying. But one of the reasons that in contemporary times, even those of us who are very traditional and observant should not have a problem with marriage between two same-sex people is that we understand that families, even biological families, can be made in ways that the ancient rabbis could have never imagined. It's just like a whole new world. There's the science, thank God. Here we are in the 21st century where we're expanding what family means even more widely and challenging even the idea of needing to have children and challenging even the idea of needing to be partnered, as it were, to be fulfilled, right? So we're continuing to expand the notion of family beyond the sort of biology of it all.
But while Reconstructionist Jews have adapted to be more welcoming, this isn't the same for all denominations of Judaism. How halacha, the body of Jewish law, changes varies in different traditions.
If you can imagine a faucet, you have some denominations like right-wing orthodoxy, that the evolution, the changing of halacha, of Jewish law, looks like when your faucet has a drip. Drip, drip, drip. It's changing very slowly, but you can see the water come out of the faucet. You will see in ultra-Orthodox communities, girls having bat mitzvahs that look nothing at all like a bat mitzvah that my daughters had, but they also look like nothing at all like the bat mitzvahs that happened for ultra-Orthodox girls 100 years ago. So that is changing, and to pretend that it's stagnant is not true. And then as we move through Orthodoxy, you can open up the faucet a little bit more and a little bit more in terms of how fast Jewish law changes. Jewish ritual law is anachronistic and not necessary in any way, shape, or form. And so sort of like putting away Jewish law altogether. So it looks different, but it also can look different between two Jews, right? Sometimes you'll have Jews who sort of hold on to one piece of law, not for any necessarily spiritual reason, but because that's what their mother and grandmother did. And sometimes you'll have people who will hold on to a law because it actually makes their life more meaningful. But just about every Jew, to a certain extent, some to a very small extent, and some to a very large extent, is a pick and choose Jew. Right? So there will be some laws that they do follow, and there will be some that they don't. And to pretend otherwise is disingenuous.
But ultimately, the community practicing the law can be as important, if not more so, than the law itself. And building an inclusive community was at the core of what Rabbi Stutman did when she helped lead the Sixth and I Synagogue.
Our only goal is to build community. We were one of the first synagogues in D.C. to have Pride Shabbat, where the Friday night of Pride weekend, we would have the people from the queer community, from the straight community just come in to just celebrate Pride. And now many synagogues have Pride Shabbat. We had other moments where we were mourning trans people who were killed, and we were sitting in sadness for all the places where queer people were being oppressed and even murdered. So it was never a question, do I want to do this or not? It was always an assumption.
And while Rabbi Stutman is one of the more progressive religious leaders when it comes to LGBTQ issues, Even she encounters difficult moments when her progressive politics collide with religious teachings.
There was a non-binary person who uses they, them pronouns who I asked to speak about God from the bima, from the pulpit. And they were going to do a reading about their connection to God. And they sent it to me ahead of time, and they were using they, them pronouns for God. And my initial reaction was, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't use they, them pronouns for God because that reminds me of polytheism, and Jews are not polytheists. And they took out the they, them pronouns, and we just used the word God. We didn't use he or she, we just used God. But this idea that I could not allow this person to see themselves in God in that moment, it's like I am never going to forget that. So I have failed every way to Sunday. And the grace that I have received from people who have pushed back against my mistakes and taught me how to do it better the next time, and who have just let me figure things out on my own, I will never forget.
I think we all have those failings. And to me, one of the most inspiring things about religion, when done right, is that if love and compassion guide you, it helps you through those ambiguities in the texts and finding ways to make those changes. I have a friend who's a rabbi, and one thing he always reminds me of when he's a Reform rabbi is he says, I always say, this is the Reformed era. He goes, no. He goes, it's not reformed, it's reform, because the change is ongoing and it's adapting. And the idea is to let people touch that transcendence, to feel welcome, to find that love. And so I think we all fail, but as long as we're moving in the right direction, I think it's good. And even though change is much slower in the Catholic Church, I asked Father Martin what Pope Francis might be doing to encourage it.
One thing I think he has changed substantively is his coming out in favor of the decriminalization of homosexuality. But he's changed zero church teaching. Most of it is gestures, meeting with LGBTQ people, talking about them in his talks. It's a lot about what he calls the culture of encounter, sending letters of support to people like me and many others who minister with LGBTQ people, meeting with transgender people. Taking it out of the realm of theological arguments and disputations and proof texting and things like that. I like to invite people to look at the real life experiences of LGBTQ people.
If you're a Christian, you know that Scripture says that Jesus met with and ate with people from all walks of life, the sinners and the strangers. And his message was that God loves them all. That culture of encounter is something Meli and Dignity USA strive for, to show up with pride and love rather than hide in shame, giving people the opportunity to talk, to share, and to see their common humanity.
I often quip, we're here, we're queer, and it's our baptismal right. And I think that part of our advocacy effort is just showing up and saying, my faith is important to me, just like your faith is important to you. And we're all here together for the same reason. I just last month went to Lisbon, Portugal with 9 other young people to go to World Youth Day. And we were absolutely not protesting. We showed up to attend. We went to Mass, and we just existed as ourselves. Many people came over to talk to us, to ask us about our lives, to ask us what we were doing there. And we were just able to talk about our lives and who we are and how our faith is so important to us. We are here, and there's room for us.
Dignity USA is working toward a time when gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Catholics are affirmed and can fully participate in all aspects of worship. The Church still has a long way to go, but this vision helps Meli and other queer Catholics keep an optimism as they work toward institutional change.
The Church isn't actually the institution, it's not the building, it's the people on the pews. And so I think for every hurtful or harmful statement that the Church has made, there's these hundreds of experiences of real life Catholics that love me, that love my wife, that support us, that welcome us. And so that's really what sustains me in my faith, is that the Church, the real Church of the people, are with me.
Religions do change over time, sometimes quickly, sometimes at a snail's pace, sometimes even by splintering, You can see each of these in the history of Christian and Jewish denominations. But when it comes to issues raised by queer Catholics and Jews, it's all still a work in progress. I'm not a theologian, and so it's not for me to lecture religious leaders about their dogma. But, and I say this sincerely, at the heart of all faiths is one thing: love. From God's words in the Torah that it's not good for people to be alone, to John the Apostle's declaration that whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them, the way forward seems pretty clear. Love between two people is a rare gift, one we should lift up and celebrate, not discriminate against. Next time, in part 2 of this series...
Upon first contact with Europeans, over 130 tribes were known to have gender nonconforming or same-sex couples living and thriving amongst society.
If you thought bias against queer people was the default around the world, think again.
If we look at places like Sulawesi, there has always been ways of thinking about being that are beyond just two gender binaries.
We'll explore how and why many cultures not only include multiple genders in their view of the world, but sometimes even give them a special place in spiritual life.
With that power of all the genders, it enabled Bisu to be mediators between the gods and the everyday people on earth.
How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. April Franklin is our intern. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, which was arranged by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can find our website at howgodworks, all one word, .org, or follow me on X or Blue Sky at David DeSteno.